In 1908, a car cost more than most Americans earned in a year. Owning one was a fantasy reserved for the rich. Then Henry Ford did something no one had ever attempted. He broke the construction of an automobile into 84 separate steps, assigned one worker to each, and dragged the chassis down a moving line. The result was staggering. Assembly time collapsed from over 12 hours to 90 minutes. The price of a Model T plummeted from $825 to just $260. Suddenly, the factory worker building the car could afford to buy one. Ford hadn't just built a cheaper vehicle. He had unlocked the most powerful engine in modern capitalism: economies of scale. The principle is deceptively simple. The more you produce, the less each unit costs. It reshaped every industry on Earth: steel, oil, groceries, books, technology. For over a century, it was the unquestioned gospel of business growth. But what happens when the theory works too well? When one company scales so large, it doesn't just beat its competitors, it erases them from existence. And then, when it no longer needs that market, simply walks away. This is that story. The idea didn't start with Ford. In 1776, a Scottish philosopher named Adam Smith walked into a pin factory and noticed something peculiar. One worker making pins alone could produce maybe 20 in a day. But when the process was divided into 18 distinct steps, one man drawing the wire, another straightening it, a third cutting it, 10 workers could produce 48,000 pins in a single day. Smith had identified the principle that would reshape the modern world. He just didn't know what to call it yet. It took another century for the theory to get a name. Alfred Marshall, writing from Cambridge in the 1890s, coined the term economists still use today: economies of scale. The logic was elegant. Spread your fixed costs across more units, and each unit gets cheaper. Build more, spend less. Simple. But here's what made it dangerous. The theory had no ceiling. It never told you when to stop. Henry Ford didn't stop. By October 1913, his Highland Park plant in Michigan had become the most efficient manufacturing operation in human history. 15 million Model Ts rolled off that line over the next 19 years. Ford then did something nobody expected. He doubled his workers' daily wage to $5, more than twice the national average. It looked like charity. It was strategy. Those workers could now afford the cars they were building. Ford hadn't just reduced production costs, he had manufactured his own customers. But Ford had proved something else too, something the textbooks rarely mention. The same force that put cars in working-class driveways also crushed every small automaker that couldn't match his volume. Scale created abundance and monopoly simultaneously, and nobody exploited that truth more ruthlessly than John D. Rockefeller. In 1870, Rockefeller controlled 4% of American oil refining. By 1880, he controlled 90%. Think about that. 4 to 90 in a single decade. And here's the part that makes the story complicated. He did it while cutting the price of kerosene from 30 cents a gallon to 8. Consumers paid less. Competitors ceased to exist. The Supreme Court eventually broke Standard Oil into 34 separate companies in 1911. The lesson seemed clear. Scale could be regulated. Monopoly could be contained. But over the next century, the theory evolved, and so did the companies wielding it. They didn't need refineries or railroads. They just needed a parking lot. In 1989, Walmart opened a store near Independence, Iowa. Within a year, a dozen local businesses, some operating for over a century, closed permanently. A University of Iowa study tracked what happened next. Over the following decade, small towns near Walmart locations lost up to 47% of their retail trade. Hardware stores, pharmacies, clothing shops, gone. Not because they sold inferior products, because they couldn't match the price of a company buying inventory at a scale no local merchant could comprehend. But here's what made the Walmart effect truly devastating. It wasn't just that local stores closed, it was what happened after. Bloomberg tracked 306 businesses in Chicago's Austin neighborhood before Walmart arrived. 2 years later, 82 had shut down. The closer a business sat to the new store, the more likely it was to disappear. And in some towns, after the local competition had been eliminated entirely, Walmart closed its own location. The community was left with nothing. No chain store, no local alternative, just empty buildings. Economists call it a retail desert. The people living in one just call it abandoned. Then came Amazon, and the theory of scale entered a dimension that Sam Walton could never have imagined. Rockefeller needed railroads. Walton needed warehouses. Jeff Bezos needed servers. Digital infrastructure made it possible to achieve economies of scale without the physical constraints that had always imposed some natural limit on growth. Amazon captured nearly 38% of all American e-commerce. Its nearest competitor, Walmart, ironically, held just over 6%. Consider what that meant for a single industry. In 1994, the American Booksellers Association counted 7,000 member stores. By 2009, that number had collapsed to 1,651. The Census Bureau tracked a 50% decline in U.S. bookshops over 2 decades. Amazon now controls 67% of the entire e-book market and 64% of online print sales. And here's the detail that tells the real story. An independent bookstore recirculates roughly 29% of its revenue back into the local economy. Amazon recirculates less than 6. Every dollar a consumer saves flows out of the community that consumer lives in. But here's what makes this chapter different from Rockefeller's. When Standard Oil was broken up, the pieces still pumped oil. When scale becomes this absolute, is there anything left to break up? Or has the damage already been done? Here's the part nobody wants to admit. The low prices are real. A family stretching a paycheck at Walmart isn't making an ideological choice. They're making a survival calculation. Amazon delivering a textbook overnight for 40% less than the campus store isn't a trick. The savings are genuine. But the theory has a cost that never appears on the receipt. Independent retailers employ 47 people for every $10 million in sales. Amazon employs 14. The price dropped. The jobs disappeared. And the communities those consumers depend on hollowed out beneath them. So why not just break them up? We did it before. Standard Oil was split into 34 companies in 1911. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. Those 34 pieces quietly reconsolidated into ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP, some of the largest corporations on Earth. A T&T was broken into 7 Baby Bells in 1984. Today, most of them have merged back into 2 companies, AT&T and Verizon. In industries where economies of scale are genuine, breakups don't hold. The economics pull the pieces back together like gravity. And now, the theory has found its most powerful host yet. Artificial intelligence requires scale that makes Amazon's server farms look modest. Training a single frontier model costs hundreds of millions of dollars. The compute demands are so extreme that only a handful of companies on the planet can afford to compete. Microsoft invested billions in OpenAI. Amazon backed Anthropic. Google backed Anthropic too. The startups that were supposed to disrupt big tech are now funded by big tech. Think about what that means. The companies that dominate search, commerce, cloud computing, and social media are now positioning themselves to dominate the next technological revolution using the same playbook. Scale the infrastructure until no one else can enter. Research from Chicago Booth found that when Google or Facebook acquired a startup, venture capital investment in that space dropped 46% within 3 years. They aren't just buying competitors, they're buying the future of competition itself. The AI market is projected to exceed $1.8 trillion by 2030, and the barriers to entry are climbing faster than at any point in the history of the theory. Adam Smith saw a pin factory, Henry Ford saw an assembly line, Jeff Bezos saw a server rack. Each looked at the same principle and saw the future. The theory never told them where it ends. Here is what Economies of Scale promised, that bigger would mean cheaper, and cheaper would mean better. For a remarkable stretch of history, that promise held. Cars became affordable, oil became plentiful, goods reached places they had never reached before. The theory worked. It worked so well that it consumed the very markets it was designed to serve. Today, the 5 most valuable companies on Earth didn't build their empires with factories and railroads. They built them with algorithms, server farms, and network effects. The same fundamental principle Ford discovered on that assembly line in Highland Park, operating now at a velocity he couldn't have imagined. And the question facing every industry, every community, every economy on Earth is no longer whether scale works. It's whether anything can survive it. Because the theory was never wrong. Scale does reduce cost. Efficiency does create abundance. But abundance concentrated in fewer and fewer hands isn't abundance at all. It's dependency. And dependency, as any small-town grocer or independent bookstore owner will tell you, has a price that doesn't show up on any spreadsheet. If this made you think, subscribe. We break down the forces reshaping the world, one story at a time.